In Jeepers Creepers, there is a terrifying monster known as the Creeper that hunts you down and gives you a fate worse than death. He uses you to take the parts he needs and then hangs what's left on his flesh wall of bodies, perfectly preserved for all eternity. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I've talked a good amount on this channel about incomprehensible forces and Lovecraftian gods, but recently I've been thinking about some monsters that are very powerful and metaphysical, but not impossible to beat, even though doing so would be very difficult. So in this video, I will be talking about some monsters that are larger than life and more powerful than the average slasher, but not quite as powerful as Lovecraftian gods. So we'll be taking a look at some movies and stories. You can expect spoilers for everything I talk about, and with that being said, let's get started. I recently watched all the Jeepers Creepers movies, and I thought the monster was very scary and unique. They call him the Creeper, and he's essentially this mysterious entity that wakes up every 23 years and then spends 23 days shopping for body parts that he needs to upkeep himself. Then the parts he doesn't need are contributed to the flesh wall in his base, full of dead bodies that are missing what he took from them and surprisingly well preserved. When he's hunting, he has plenty of opportunities to just kill, but he likes to do things like wait on scarecrows or pierce school bus wheels with human bones. I guess when you only get 23 days to live, you want to maintain your reputation of a scary monster. Even when he's upside down, his hat stays on, and with all that flying, he never loses his coat, so it's important for him to upkeep his image. Even though he's very humanoid, it feels like a monster with the abilities he has and his style of hunting. He can get hurt and take quite a beating, but he will always come back, even when you thought it was over. One of the girls in the second movie has some psychic abilities, and she feels the monster's power and how hopeless fights against him are. He has wings, some sick acrobatic skills, and he gets pretty freaky at times too. Part 2 goes a bit more into the biology. There is a scene where he tears his head off and somehow processes another guy's head to replace his. Also, depending on whose head he consumed most recently, his eyes change to that of the victim, which is quite unsettling. At the end of the second movie, they sort of defeat him for the time being, but he will come back after 23 years no matter what. So there's a guy waiting for him with a gun for when that day comes. However, I do think they could have just cut him into pieces to be extra safe, but what do I know? In 2018, a short comic released about the Creeper, going more into the background lore, where we learn that he's present across many cultures and folklore. And it gets pretty crazy. First, the Creeper turns out to be an ancient Aztec deity who took heart sacrifices, and they called him the Dragon God. And technically, it could be seen as a god, I guess. But it could also be just a monster that didn't complain at sacrifices. Sort of like the angel from Midnight Mass, who was just a vampire that was willing to put on church attire and cosplay as an angel in order to get fed blood. Then he also has ties to Native American folklore, where he is known as the Uktena. And once again, people voluntarily fed him body parts as a sacrifice to stop him from taking lives at will. What makes him interesting to me is that he feels both modern and ancient at the same time. It blurs the line between a supernatural entity and just a very old, well-adapted predator, like the alien from Nope. I also think the films deliberately keep his origins vague, because once you pin him down as Aztec god or native monster, he becomes less scary. The unknown is where he thrives. Why does he only get 23 days? Why is it always every 23 years? Why not 24? Does he actually choose what to take from people, or is he compelled, like a parasite following some rule? This is why the Creeper works so well. He's not only physically intimidating, everyone who encounters him feels that hopelessness, that sense that the fight doesn't matter because he'll be back anyway. Even when you win, you're really just pressing pause until the cycle starts again. Although I do think that if you put him in a wood chipper right when the 23 days are up, he would have a hard time returning. But they didn't make a movie with that plot just yet. Another monster that resurfaces every so many years is Pennywise the Dancing Clown from the story It by Stephen King. A long time ago, he came to Earth from the Macroverse, which in King's mythology exists outside of our universe. This one comes out every 27 years, and on the surface he looks like a clown, but in reality, he's an ancient predator that feeds on fear. Like the Creeper, he has a cycle. He hibernates beneath the town of Derry, then emerges for a set period of time to feast, mostly on children, because their fear is more flavorful. He could kill instantly, but he chooses to play with his victims before consuming them and scare them as much as possible. He thrives on fear, and the more afraid his prey becomes, the easier they are to take, and the better they taste. He can get inside your head and weaponize your imagination against you. Even though he usually uses the clown facade, his true form is something beyond comprehension. In King's mythology, he's not really a clown, but a being tied to cosmic entities called the Deadlights, some kind of interdimensional essence that drives people insane if they catch a glimpse of it. The closest form that we can comprehend to the Deadlights is Pennywise's spider form. The clown persona is just a mask that the Deadlights chose because they believe it's the best way to scare kids. But the reality is that Pennywise is more like a god or demon that fell to earth, a Lovecraftian concept. Rather than going mad, you enter this catatonic state. The Deadlights don't kill you, but force you to experience the most terrifying fear imaginable for all eternity. Pennywise also isn't invincible in the usual sense, because he can be hurt. It's like whatever he truly is exists in 4 dimensions, or beyond. And in order to hurt the kids, he has to go down to 3 dimensions, which allows them to do some damage. The kids from the story manage to make him retreat by not being afraid of him. But he's only going to hibernation, and you can expect him back in 20. He's woven into the history of Derry, influencing events of the town across centuries. The grown-ups in Derry ignore when weird things happen to kids because he managed to corrupt or brainwash everyone simply by existing. Even when the main characters leave Derry, they forget any events related to Pennywise, because it was so strange and bizarre that their brains couldn't really handle it. It isn't until they return in 27 years that the memories start flowing back, because they entered his domain again, and are able to understand that logic again. Yet he's also part of something bigger, a being that exists on a level where human concepts like time and death don't really apply. You could look at him as a demon who haunts a small town, or as a cosmic parasite that settled into one place because it found a good feeding ground. Pennywise is frightening because he combines the familiar with the unknowable. The clown makeup and the red balloon are instantly recognizable, but behind them lurks something that doesn't belong on Earth at all. He's personal and theatrical in his hunts, but at the same time he represents something vast and alien, something closer to a god of fear than a simple monster. And that blend of the everyday and the cosmic is what makes Pennywise so interesting and unique. This is also why, movie-wise, I prefer the 90s depiction of Pennywise, because he looked more human, and in the remake he's more over the top and extravagant. In the original, he looks like your average clown, which is why when he opens his mouth or makes a picture move, it hits even harder because it's so uncanny. Freddy Krueger is my favorite slasher character, and he has to be one of the most creative and disturbing movie monsters of all time. Unlike Jason or Michael, who haunt the physical world, Freddy's territory is the subconscious, the dream world. That already sets him apart, because dreams are something you can't escape. No matter how hard you fight to stay awake, eventually you'll drift off. And that's when he strikes. In life, Freddy was just a man, so vile that the law couldn't punish him. The parents of Elm Street decided to take justice into their own hands and burn him alive. But rather than dying, Freddy came back twisted into something worse. A supernatural entity powered by fear, living in the subconscious dream realm of his victims. In dreams, Freddy is omnipotent. He bends reality however he wants. He can turn hallways infinite, melt phones into screaming mouths, or suck you into your bed. Freddy also has weaknesses, and that's where the films get interesting. He can be fought if you bring him into the real world, where he's more vulnerable, like Pennywise when he has to hurt the kids. He can be resisted if you take away his power by refusing to believe in him. But those victories always feel temporary, which is why I like the ending of the first movie. It's ambiguous if anything was actually done to defeat him. He comes back again and again, because as long as people fear him, he finds a way to return. And Freddy also blends the human and the supernatural. His burned face, sweater, and hat are very grounded and mundane. But then you remember he can turn into a giant worm or stretch across the sky, and suddenly he feels cosmic. That mixture makes him more unsettling than a silent killer with a knife. He's a reminder that fear itself can manifest into something alive, that nightmares can crawl out of your subconscious and into the world. The Shadow at the Bottom of the World is a short story by Thomas Ligotti, who I have been quite a fan of for the past few months. The story is about a strange, incomprehensible force that manifested in a small town and spawned bizarre feelings and emotions to the people around it. And the vibe of the story matches perfectly with the fall season, so there is no better time to be talking about it than now. The narrator talks in plural, as if multiple members of the town experienced the same exact feelings and emotions, except for a Mr. Marble, who had more information on the changes that were happening, and he had been studying them for a while. Before anything truly bizarre happened, the town slowly entered into a different state of being. There came a bitter scent into the air, as of sweet wine turning to vinegar, and there was an hysteric brilliance flourished by the trees in town, as well as those in the woods beyond, while along the roads between there were intemperate displays of thorn apple, sumach, and towering sunflowers that nodded behind crooked roadside fences. Even the starts of chill nights seemed to grow delirious and take on the tints of an earthly inflammation. And I love how this picture of a eerie autumn is painted. Innocent at first, but darker when you take a closer look. It reminded me of that Over the Guarded Wall episode. I think it's number 2, when they go into this village that seems cute and full of autumn vibes, but turns out to be something a little more sinister. Then the Scarecrow appears, our monster, watching over a ground cleared of crops. But the ground wouldn't turn cold like it was supposed to by this time of the year, as if fall wouldn't give way to winter. All the narrators had a good view of this field from their houses, and that proximity affected their being. The head of the figure was slumped forward, as if a grotesque slumber had overtaken its straw stuffed body, and the arms were slackly extended in a way that suggested some incredible gesture toward flight. For a moment, it seemed to be an insistent wind which was flapping those patched up overalls and fluttering the worn flannel of those shirt sleeves. And it would seem a forceful wind indeed, which caused that stitched up head to nod in its dreams. It moved as if with the wind, but the nearby trees and bushes didn't match the movements, which I think is pretty cool. And I actually heard about this before from the story Willows by Blackwood, and I thought that was a very cool concept in that story as well. Something moving with the wind, but not really. So what's making it move? And there were some who claimed that the scarecrow actually raised its arms and its empty face to the sky, as though declaring itself to the heavens, while others thought that its legs kicked wildly, like those of a man who is hanged, and that they kept on kicking for the longest time before the thing collapsed and lay quiet. The narrators woke up in the night. Their dreams were related to the scarecrow, so they wanted to go investigate it. But they didn't find much to satisfy their curiosity, at least not at first. Around the scarecrow, the ground was unnaturally warm, and there was droning sounds coming from the inside. The farmer whose land this was on wanted to get rid of it. Yet the shape that stood before us was of a wholly different nature. It was something black and twisted into the form of a man, something that seemed to have come up from the earth and grown over the wooden planks like a dark fungus, consuming the structure. There were now black legs that hung as if charred and withered. There was a head that sagged like a sack of ashes upon a meager body of blackness, and there were thin arms stretched out like knobby branches from a lightning-scorched tree. All of this was supported by a thick, dark stalk which rose out of the earth and reached into the effigy like a hand into a puppet. Its composition appeared to be of the blackest earth, of earth that had gone stagnant somewhere in its depths, where a rich loam had festered into a bog of shadows. Soon we realized that each of us had fallen silent, entranced by a deep blackness which seemed to absorb our sight, but which exposed nothing to scrutiny except an abyss in the outline of a man. And this is definitely the scariest depiction of a scarecrow I've come across so far, because it's not really a scarecrow, it's some incomprehensible force that is using it as an avatar. So the farmer wanted to cut this thing down, so he used an axe, but rather than slicing through it, the axe just entered the dark void. And when he made the attack, the droning sounds increased in level. And when he made the attack, the droning sound increased, and it sounded like innumerable insects laughing. The narrators start digging the ground around at the same time, as if they all got the idea at once. But no matter how far they dug, all they were met with was that deep, black void. Eventually, nighttime came, and they became reluctant and stopped digging. And when they walked home, they were whispering, even though they weren't sure why they felt the need to whisper. They returned in the morning to continue digging, but still, all they saw was the blackness. The farmer dropped a rock in the void, but nothing could be heard back, as if it entered a bottomless pit. Sometime after, the dreams of the townspeople intensified, as if the force that was taking over entered a new phase. And here we get some pretty bizarre descriptions of these dreams, but I guess that's fitting because we could never understand what they were like. In sleep, we were consumed by the feverish life of the earth, cast among a rip's fairly rotting world of strange growth and transformation. We took a place within a darkly flourishing landscape where even the air was ripened into ruddy hues and everything wore the wrinkled grimace of decay, the mottled complexion of old flesh. The face of the land itself was knotted with so many other faces, ones that were corrupted by vile impulses. They felt as if another life was settling inside of them, inviting us into the depths of an extraordinary harvest. Eventually, these things started to bleed into real life. Things from dreams and who knows where bleeding into our reality. And this became normal in the town, an accepted change of reality that everyone took part in. Mr. Marble, who was the one who was researching this event for a while, started to read the leaves as if there was some writing or hieroglyphs on them. And these symbols or depictions would also later manifest on walls, stones, and people's homes. With time, everybody in town was eventually able to understand them or interpret them in some way. Since Mr. Marble is always the first one to get the new update, he was the first who started. Then came a night where a strange figure could be seen traversing the streets of the town. That night we kept to our houses and watched at our windows. It was no marvel, then, that so many of us saw the one who wandered that iridescent eve, who joined in its outbursts and celebrations. Possessed by the ecstasies of a dark festival, he moved in a trance, bearing in his hands that great ceremonial knife whose keen edge flashed 1,000 glittering dreams. He was seen standing alone beneath trees whose colors shined upon him, staining his face and his tattered clothes. He was seen standing alone in the yards of our houses, a rigid scarecrow concocted from a patchwork of colors and shadows. He was seen stalking slow and rhythmically beside high wooden fences that were now painted with a quivering colored glow. And for some reason, I imagined it moving like the thing from Pulse. I don't know why my mind went there, maybe because that is the creepiest way I've ever seen something move. He's faced with a tourist mother and child, but they managed to escape, even though the townspeople were hoping they would get killed so they wouldn't find out about this change of reality or whatever was going on here. The morning after, the ground finally turned cold, there was no more leaves, and fall finally gave way to winter. Mr. Marble's body was discovered in a field with a scarecrow, his left arm chopped off and his right hand holding it. Maybe whatever took hold of him cut it off, or maybe he cut it off himself to stop it from doing something sinister. When they carried his body, they realized that what was supposed to be blood was actually that same blackness that they found in the ground a few days earlier. So it looks like the corruption took over Mr. Marble more than anyone else because he had the biggest imagination. And in the final evolution of the event, it took hold of him as its avatar. The townspeople then buried him in that bottomless pit. If you're familiar with Lovecraft, this story may remind you of The Color Out of Space, where an asteroid hits some land and spawns unnatural colors and vegetation around it. However, much like Pennywise is both familiar and foreign, so is Ligoti's shadow in contrast to The Color Out of Space, because the autumn and scarecrow motifs are familiar and even comforting, making what happens even more foreign and bizarre. Lovecraft's Color Out of Space is from literal space. Ligoti's shadow is earthly and therefore more wrong to be doing these things. Everyone in the town had this bizarre fear of the thing, and rather than it being some cosmic alien, it was a scarecrow. So it feels more personal and human, but at the same time incomprehensible because of the forces behind it. I think in this video, we learned that the scariest monsters are those who mix the incomprehensible with familiar, because those two make each other stick out even more.